as one component of the Profiting for Innovation framework.
No, but the other way around is true. Profiting from innovation is one component of the dynamic capabilities perspective. Dynamic capabilities is this, I'll call it in a self-deprecating way, a poor man's systems theory. It's sort of a workable systems theory that combines all of these different elements that you need to build competitive advantage. And one of those elements is the capture value strategy. And you'll see when we get into the sensing, seizing, transforming framework that part of seizing is creating business models that capture value. So capturing value and profiting from innovation is very much part of the broader framework in the way I've indicated. But a very good question. Took me a while to figure it out too.
Okay, great. And so that was from Farouk. The second question from Chris, who notes that he's dialing in from a certain country close to New Zealand, known as Australia, asks, can we use the framework for small companies and startups as well as for venture capital firms, or is it more applicable for larger companies?
Well, it very much can be used. You'll see as we move in, we've broken the framework down into a sensing, seizing, and transforming part. And the sensing and seizing are very applicable to the startup world. You don't have to transform very much with a startup because you don't have much to transform. You don't have a past history. But lean startup fits under dynamic capabilities, and very much the challenge is to take the entrepreneurial thinking of a startup and put it into a big organization. So in some sense, a small organization, a startup has got strong dynamic capabilities, is likely to have strong dynamic capabilities until they get successful. Is when you get successful is when you tend to lose them, because you become bureaucratic. And that's where my friend Charles O'Reilly talked about, you got to learn ambidexterity. But dynamic capabilities is actually easier when you're small, but there's one big caveat. It's not just about being agile. It's about placing the right bets. And, as you know, 19 out of 20 startups fail because they placed the wrong bets or they got the wrong people or something like that. So just because you're small and just because you're fleet of foot, just because you're agile, doesn't give you strong dynamic capabilities. It's to be able to make sense of the marketplace and to invest in the right places. And not all startups get it right. Most of them get it wrong. Is there another question?
All right. I don't think so.
All right. Well, then let's sort of pick up. We're still doing the preamble to dynamic capabilities. And, here we've got from Mr. Zuckerberg, who doesn't have the most imaginative brand or trademark in the world, does he? But the point is a good one. The biggest risk is not taking any risk. So remember, dynamic capability is about making sure you don't get overwhelmed by efficiency and making sure also that you actually take some risk. And companies that try to avoid risk, including banks, by the way, and we'll come to that. I mean, it's obviously hard language to talk about for a bank. A bank is supposed to never take risk, but frequently their risk management systems are blind to deep uncertainty. They're taking huge risks all the time. They just don't know it because they've defined the world as being risky rather than exposed to deep uncertainty. Anyway, so, Zuckerberg has it right. The biggest risk is not taking any risk. If you're not losing a few bets, if you're not failing every now and again, you're not winning either. There's another way to say the same thing. Next, please, Ian. So one way to summarize this is that dynamic capabilities is about a more ambitious paradigm for decision making. So, you know, you don't build great companies by making tiny little incremental bets. You build great companies by making bold, brassy bets, but smart ones. I mean, you make bold, brassy bets that are dumb, you're out of business. So question is, how do you determine ex ante what a smart bet is? Think about IBM. IBM used to be just a punch card maker, a business services company way back in the 50s. Wasn't in the computer industry at all. Who was in the computer industry in the 1950s? You know, Sperry, Univac, General Electric, Westinghouse, all these big companies were in the computer business. IBM was a zero player. It came in and Mr. Watson Sr. bet the company on the 360 system and figured out that, well, we needed a system. You weren't going to win just with a computer. You needed peripheral devices. You needed printers. You needed the whole apparatus. You needed a system. And IBM bet the company, big brassy bet, to make the 360 system. And that stood IBM in good stead for, 30 plus years. Boeing, with a jumbo jet, with a 747. That was a big, bold, brassy bet. Kept the company going, for 50 years. And if you're not willing to make a few big, bold, brassy bets, you're not going to succeed in today's marketplace. So being too conservative is as bad as being too risky. So let's look on the right there of the slide. Amazon, who would have thought they would go from selling books to doing everything? Who would have thought that SpaceX could be a commercial space company? These were big, bold, brassy bets. Who would have thought that Apple would be the highest market cap company in the world? Dubai was a big, bold, brassy bet. When everybody says it's possible and doable, that's when it's time not to be there. The only way you get ahead is by, sensing an opportunity or a threat way ahead of everybody else and acting on it in a timely fashion. And the problem with today's boards of directors is they're all, kind of a bit risk averse, and they should be encouraging companies to take bets instead of hauling the CEO over the coals when they make the wrong bets. If don't encourage a certain amount of risk taking, you'll let the company will die. So in a world of deep uncertainty, you've got to place some significant bets, but you got to be smart about it, and you got to decide without full information. If you wait until you got full information, it's too late. Other people will be ahead of you. Next slide, please, Ian. So, in a way, this is about a new cognitive framework. And running a company in the industrial economy, which is Michael Porter's book, is written for the industrial economy. That's what they teach you at Harvard, is strategy for the industrial economy. And the industrial economy sort of disappeared sometime in the late 80s. We've been in the knowledge economy for, almost 30, 40 years now. And the metaphor for management is not one of perfection and precision. It's not, the metaphor for the manager is you are orchestrating things, but it's not like you're conducting a symphony orchestra where everything's in tune. It's more like jazz, and here is, with jazz, there's a lot of improvisation and things are changing all the time. There's no script as such. And Reed Hastings really summarizes this quite nicely in his book, which some of you I'm sure have read, called No Rules Rules. But he says the symphony isn't what you're doing, what you're going for. So in Silicon Valley today, or in the tech world in general, or in any global industry where there's fierce competition, it's not like conducting a symphony orchestra. It's like building a jazz band. Musicians know the overall structure of the song, but have the freedom to improvise ripping off one another and creating incredible music. So jazz is a better metaphor than the symphony orchestra. Next, please. Actually, another metaphor that people use for strategy is chess. In fact, some of you may know, I've co-authored the first encyclopedia on strategic management called the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Strategic Management. It's 5 volumes long. And what did the publisher put on the cover? But a chessboard. And I said, please don't. That's yesterday's strategy. What we need to put on the cover is, you know, something from the knowledge economy, either a jazz band or what I've got on the right there is mixed martial arts. So if the symphony orchestra was a metaphor for the industrial economy, it's jazz, which is a metaphor for the knowledge economy. If chess is a metaphor for the industrial economy, it's mixed martial arts in the knowledge economy. So despite the fact that I volunteered 4 years of my life to write this encyclopedia for free, they still printed it with chessboard on the cover because that's what they said people thought strategy was about. And I said, yes, I know that, but I'm trying to teach them it's something different. So I lost that war. I guess I didn't make a big, bold, brassy bet, and so I lost that war, and so did Palgrave Macmillan. Anyway, that shows you what we're up against when you try to change people's ways of thinking. It takes a while. But if you're in the edge of Silicon Valley, it's a little easier. If you're in the middle of Silicon Valley, if you haven't already changed your way of thinking, you're dead. Next slide, please.
Should be coming up. There we go.
All right. So the question was put before about, well, you know, it just worked for little companies too, and the answer is very much so. But the biggest problems you face are if you're a large company, and that's the incumbent. When I say incumbency trap, I'm talking about the problems big companies have. And, you know, it's really sad that so many of our great companies go down the toilet. You know, Kodak, a great company for 100 years, and it goes bankrupt. You know, General Motors is floundering. General Electric is floundering. Why are all these great companies floundering? You know, in my view, between conspiracy in the boardroom and on Wall Street, dynamic capabilities is being squeezed out. Both have got some blood on their hands on this, as does the academic community, as does my colleagues, as does the Harvard Business School that teaches all of this stuff from the industrial economy and expects it to help companies that are trying to compete in the knowledge economy. You know, there's, when the situation is as bad as it is, there's plenty of blame to go around. And we should take our share in the academic world, but so should Wall Street take its share, and so should managers. We have a social responsibility to make sure we build and grow great companies that can provide good jobs. So instead of thinking about all the things that are on people's social responsibility agenda, you know, how about the long-term profitability, survival, and growth of the enterprise? That is the greatest of all social responsibilities, because you can't do anything else unless you achieve that first. And there's a lot of distractions and other agendas that people put up, but you've got to pay attention to the core, or there's nothing left to play with. And then you've got a Kodak on your hands, or an IBM, which is a sick company today compared to what it once was. Next slide, please. So here, and this is a new way I talk about dynamic capabilities. If you ask, why don't more companies have strong dynamic capabilities, is they're trapped by their histories. Their dynamic capabilities are weak because they've overly focused on efficiency, and they've been successful. And they're focused also on building ordinary capabilities. They've hired all these MBAs from other schools that tell them that efficiency is the God to worship at, you know, whereas at Berkeley, innovation and entrepreneurship is a key part of our curriculum, and I hope it's the key part that brought you to Berkeley, and I hope it's a key part you take away from Haas Berkeley. The result of being focused on efficiency and on market share is insufficient innovation, low productivity growth, inflexibility, and decline. So this is not just intellectual waffle. This is about the future of our companies. This is about the future of our economy. This is about the future of our society. This is about the future of democracy. This is about the future of everything that's precious to us. So we got to get it right. Next, please. So, you know, this is pretty standard fare. And here's Mr. Frazier from Merck, who says it very elegantly, because he's working in a big company and he knows the problems. This is one of the challenges associated with a company becoming large, is that companies become hierarchical. Yes, you know, the further east their headquarters are located, the more hierarchical they become. The Silicon Valley companies are not so hierarchical, but yes, as you go east of the Sierras, they become more hierarchical. They also become bureaucratic. Why do they become bureaucratic? Because bureaucracies are actually efficient at getting definable jobs done, you know, setting up rules. There's reasons for rules. It makes certain things easier, but it also makes change harder. And that's his next statement. They become slow and they become risk averse. So, you know, it's success, which is, you know, the biggest enemy of dynamic capabilities. It's success, it's the incumbency trap, and it's also, the incumbency trap is aided and abetted by my profession of economics, which worships at the foot of efficiency. It's the Wall Street so-called shareholder activists that they're looking for that extra cost saving to give that extra penny a share for the next quarter. It's this kind of stuff. And managers giving into it. Managers giving into it and boards giving into it. So, you know, we've got to strengthen the spine, not just the intelligence, not just the strategic thinking of managers, but we've also got to strengthen the spine of boards and the spine of managers, because this stuff is tough. It's easy to go the way of bureaucracy. It's easy to be slow about making decisions. It's hard to be bold. It's easy to be risk averse. And it, as we saw a few moments ago, if you don't take enough risk, you're on your way out. Next, please. So if you, if I may use this metaphor, drink the Kool-Aid of dynamic capability, it'll help you get out of these traps. Well, it's not really Kool-Aid. It's the Sprite, I suppose. But if you buy this message, I believe it'll help you get out of this trap. And it's not just about agility. This is what drives me crazy when I go. I haven't been to an airport bookstore lately because I haven't been to an airport for a while. Actually, I was at an airport a month ago, but the airport bookstores are closed. But what sells in the airport bookstores is emblematic of what most managers are reading, which is a silver bullet approach to solving problems. So the number of books which say agility, all you need is agility. Well, it's not just the ability to do things faster and cheaper. Efficiency is a little bit about doing things faster and cheaper, nor is it the reduction in time required to reach best practices. So you have all these things like Six Sigma and value engineering, and a lot of those companies that won those awards went out of business. So you can win on Six Sigma, but if you're doing the wrong product, Six Sigma doesn't help you very much. So yes, this is exactly what Deming was telling us 30, 40 years ago. People keep falling into the same trap. So if it's not about these things, what is dynamic capabilities about? Yes, agility is helpful, but it's not enough. It's the ability, as we'll see, to sense, see, transform, and to do so in a strategically sound way. That is the sort of punchline here for dynamic capabilities. Next slide, please. So in case you're not yet on board, you know, this is the purpose of today's class is to make sure you're in the right class. And my allies here are some of our great CEOs. Our business school professor just prattling away about this thing has little legitimacy in the world. But if I can find a CEO that sings from my songbook, or maybe I'm singing in this case from her songbook, or whatever way, if we're singing from the same songbook, maybe I get a little legitimacy from you folks. Academic creds are not enough. So here, this is me breaking a great interview with the CEO, Nuya. She's no longer the CEO, but she was the CEO of Pepsi. She says, I could have taken the easy road. This is the ordinary capabilities road. I had a choice. I could have gone pedal to the metal, stripped out costs, delivered strong profit for a few years, and then said adios. But that wouldn't have yielded long-term success. So that's saying I could have doubled down on ordinary capabilities. I could have doubled down on efficiency. I could have hired from the bottom of the class at Haas and gotten a bunch of kids that could do me a cost reduction program, because you can all do cost reduction programs. But she said I didn't do that. I went to the top of the class and I articulated a strategy to the board, focusing on the portfolio we needed to build the muscles. Look at that, it's almost as good as saying capability. To build the muscles we needed to strengthen, and then she says it, the capabilities to develop, to strengthen the company for the long term. So there we are, CEOs using the language of capabilities. She knows in her bones what this is all about. All this course is that I'm doing for you is pulling out of the bones of our best CEO what they know and what you know too about greatness. They're giving you the courage to hang on to it so that when somebody else tells you some other nonsense, you can tell them they're wrong. You need the confidence to act. And that's what I'm giving you in this class. I'm giving you the confidence to act for what you know is right. And there's forces around you every day in the workplace, from the office of the CFO, from investor relations and elsewhere, to take you to the wrong place, to take you to the short-term place, to take you to the here and now place. But if you're a custodian of the future, if you're a steward of the future, if you're a good leader and you're going to contribute to society and to your company, you're going to go down the dynamic capabilities pathway, and you'll get recognized for it sooner or later, but you'll take a few black eyes along the way, that I promise you. Next slide, please. Okay, so my colleague Jiro Nanaka in Japan, Hidesabashi, has published another number of papers in the Harvard Business Review. By the way, Harvard Business Review is light reading. That's coffee table stuff. And that's sadly almost as much as you can get under the nose of executives these days. So we have this privileged period when you're in business school where you actually read and listen. It kind of stops for too many people thereafter. Not with you folks, because you're still in school, or if you're alumni, you've come back because you know that there's some wisdom here. Wise leaders who are entrepreneurial able to avoid the efficiency trap. How do they do it? Well, here's Reed Hastings, who's another one of my heroes. With no rules. All of our leaders become aligned on the idea that preventing errors or saving money is not our primary objective. Doesn't that make all the sense in the world? You know, when there's in a world of deep uncertainty, saving a few pennies doesn't do you any good. You've got to get onto the right ideas. You've got to figure out the right services to offer. You've got to figure out the right products to offer. You've got to get hold of that customer information and use it to create new products. And then he said, don't prioritize error prevention over flexibility. Everybody in the organization, the office of the general counsel, the board of directors, they're always telling you, we don't want errors, thank you very much. That, you know, by pursuing error prevention, you often make the organization more bureaucratic, less flexible. And then he goes on to say, our North Star is building a company that is able to adapt quickly as unforeseen opportunities arise and business conditions change. Our North Star is building a company that's able to adapt quickly as unforeseen opportunities arise and business conditions change. And I would add, that's pretty much an A- dynamic capability statement. If you had said, and shape the opportunities, not just opportunities arise, it's also you create opportunities. That's part of what being a great company is all about. But that's a nice A- statement. Thank you, Reed. Next, please, Ian. So this is a little bit of a summary slide. For those of you that like order for your thinking, I like order for my thinking. I'm throwing a heck of a lot of ideas at you, and your job with my assistants is to try and organize your mind so that you can hold on to these ideas. Because if these ideas are not organized in your mind, they will fall out of your mind, and it'll be like a Chinese meal. So I'm going to try and present you with a framework. And so here are some of the bones of that framework. So we have two types of capabilities. They both matter, but one more than the other. The one that matters the most, as Reed Hastings just pointed out, is the dynamic capability. And that's about entrepreneurial leadership. Now, to some people, that's an oxymoron. You have entrepreneurs that run small companies, and you have leaders that lead big companies. But what I'm presenting to you and what I'm suggesting to you is that the only way big companies stay relevant is to actually keep the entrepreneurial spirit going as they get bigger. And that happens, frequently happens, well, it doesn't frequently happen, but it happens when you got the founders, when you got the Jeff Bezos there, when you got the Elon Musk there, when you got the Steve Jobs there, or I wouldn't say that Cook is a clone of Steve Jobs, but at least he did understand a number of the rules that Steve Jobs put down, like, the customer, and make it a pleasant user experience, make the product elegant, and there's certain things, make it compatible, make it cool. Certain things that Steve Jobs articulated very well, and there was enough of a track record that even a Tim Cook could keep that going. Even though he was a supply chain guy, he sort of got enough of it that Apple still keeps on going. But he's not as good at it as Steve Jobs would have been. But maybe he's better at running a big organization than Jobs would have been. The two together were certainly a great dynamo. So the purpose of dynamic capabilities is about achieving strategic fit over the long run. So the goal here is not maximizing profits. The goal is evolutionary fitness. But if you pursue the goal of evolutionary fitness, you will end up maximizing long-term profits. The problem is if you make profit the goal, you won't earn the profits you need. I mean, I know it sounds like a semantic quibble, but it's not. If you focus on profits, you won't make them. You make them in the short run, but if you focus on profits, you won't make them in the long run. If you focus on evolutionary fitness, which is how do I build something great that's compatible with what our customers want and has got a cost structure attached to it that'll let me make money, then I've got a better chance of succeeding. So purpose for dynamic capabilities is evolutionary fitness, and that may include some elements of corporate social responsibility. There's a tripartite schema, as I call it, 3 parts to this: sensing, seizing. I've now added a 4th: sensing, seizing, shaping, and transforming. So it's a quadratic schema, I suppose. And what is the imitability characteristics of this? If you're able to do it, the reason why you'll make supernormal profits is because nobody else can imitate what you're doing. It's difficult to imitate, or it's inimitable. So that is the nature of dynamic capabilities. It's better than having a bunch of patents. You may have a bunch of patents as well, which are great. But dynamic capabilities, you'll have an organization that other people can't copy. Who can build, a SpaceX that looks anything like Elon Musk's SpaceX? Nobody can. So you've got a point of difference, hopefully a positive point of difference. SpaceX is a positive point of difference. So you build these great companies with dynamic capabilities. They're very distinctive, and they can compete in distinctive ways, and they can win in distinctive ways. And that's about doing the right things, and innovation is key to it. That's what dynamic capabilities is about. Most of the textbooks and most of the stuff you learn in business schools about administrative management. It used to be that the Haas School was called the School of Business Administration. Thank God we've dropped the administration part. It gives me a chance to keep dynamic capabilities going. But most business schools teach administrative management. It's about technical efficiency and basic business functions. You know, how to squeeze the cost out. You know, how to run the IT department at lowest cost. You know, how to squeeze some cost out of manufacturing. The tripartite schema is operations, administrative, and governance are the key things. The problem is, if this stuff, even if you got best practice, you know, best practices can be imitated. So doing things right is not enough. You have to do the right things. And sometimes these are at war with each other. In fact, they're frequently at war with each other. And the art of management is actually to balance the two. Next slide, please. All right, so that's the overview. Now, every good MBA student says, well, thank you very much, Professor Teece. How do I make this work on the job? And this is, I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch of how you do that. We'll spend the rest of the class talking about this, but I'm going to give you, I told you I was going to jump, or have you jump into the deep end of the swimming pool. And we're going to try and operationalize this framework, recognizing that it's a systems theory of management. Recognizing it's very hard to operationalize a system, but that doesn't mean to say you can't have a go at it or that you can't have a good try. And I'm going to do it by organizing these ideas into three big buckets: sensing and sense-making, seizing and transforming. So next slide, please, Ian. People have beaten on me to simplify, so here it is. Dynamic capabilities in a business context can be thought of as falling into these three categories. Sensing, which is the identification of opportunities and threats, not just opportunities, and threats, not just at home, but abroad. So figuring out the direction of travel of the future, which way is the future leaning? And not enough to figure out the future if you can't make decisions, you can't invest to take advantage of that. And there are many companies like Xerox PARC, classic case. They sensed the whole future of computing way back in the late 60s and early 70s at Xerox PARC in Palo Alto, and dropped the ball when it came to the next step, which is, okay, but you now got to invest behind that. Boeing could figure that out. IBM could figure it out, but Xerox couldn't. And that's about mobilizing the resources to deliver value and shape markets. So it's a whole set of important decisions that you have to make, and getting an organization, particularly a big one, aligned so that they can all agree on what the future is and then bet the company on it. That's not easy. And then, of course, if you're successful, as IBM was, as Kodak was, as General Motors was, any company that's successful is going to be successful based on yesterday, but tomorrow is going to be different, and then you've got to learn to transform. You've got to keep changing. You've got to keep continuously renewing and making major strategic shifts. So these are the buckets of things. And, you know, you could write an encyclopedia on every single bullet here. And we're not going to be writing an encyclopedia. I've actually written an encyclopedia. You'll find many of the bits and pieces in the encyclopedia. But I'm going to give you the shorthand, the Cliff Notes view. Today, it's a Cliff Notes view on sensing, seizing, and transforming. And most of the rest of the class will be moving from the Cliff Notes view to a more fuller articulation of what this means and getting you in not just a frame of mind to do this, but having a few rules of thumb in your hip pocket or in your purse or your bag or wherever you carry your great things around, so that you can put it into practice in your everyday life and in your jobs. Next slide, please, Ian. So, sensing. Well, if it wasn't for Einstein, of course, we would say that light travels in a straight line, but we know that isn't quite true, but it's true enough. But as Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, now passed away, said, you got to be able to see around corners. And that's a nice metaphor for highlighting the fact you got to figure out the future before others do. Now, early on, we talked about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So how the heck, and we talked about the fog of war. So how can you see in the fog of war? Well, I suppose the answer is the fog lights help a little bit. But the answer is you're never going to get clarity of vision in the fog of war. You're never going to get clarity in the fog, but you've got to learn to operate in the fog. And we all know that you can operate in the fog, but you've actually got to learn to run and travel at high speed in the fog. So that's really quite hard. And Kenneth Boulding, great economist, philosopher, said, he recognizes this. He says, look, the future is bound to surprise us. That's another way of saying when there's surprises, that's deep uncertainty. Okay, so there's going to be surprises, but you don't have to be dumbfounded. You don't have to be the deer in the headlights. The deer in the headlights is what we're trying to avoid. And most CEOs, quite frankly, are deer in the headlights. And so when you're deer in the headlights, you usually end up getting run over. And Jack Welch then goes on to say, the ability to foresee future opportunities and threats is really what it's all about. So I like the Kenneth Boulding statement. I mean, Jack Welch is saying the obvious, but Boulding is saying don't give up hope. Don't assume, just because there's deep uncertainty, that there aren't cognitive frameworks that you can use. Scenario planning is one such cognitive framework. Adopting real options thinking is another cognitive framework. There are ways to do better. But if you're hunting for precision and certainty, you're in the wrong game. You'll never find it. And if you're waiting for clarity, you waited too long. That's Zuckerberg, you know, if you don't take some risks, you're out of the game. So if you sit around waiting for certainty, and many CEOs do, that's out. That's inaction is as bad as the wrong action. Next slide, please. You know, when you're trying to get people to change their way of thinking, you've got to appeal to somebody smarter than yourself, because nobody's going to follow what David Teece says. So if I hunt around, I can find some pretty smart guys that I can use to lever my ideas off of. And this is one of the smartest guys that humanity's ever seen. And he says with amazing simplicity, intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. You know, I'm not too sure too many of my smart colleagues at Berkeley would agree. The smartest of the smart would, but some of them don't. There comes a leap of consciousness, call it intuition or what you will, and the solution comes to you and you don't know how or why. You know, he's thinking about discovery in science, but it's not too different from discovery in business. And the discovery in business is about discovering an opportunity. The whole Austrian School of Economics was about discovery. You know, the Austrian School of Economics is basically dead, except in the minds of a few innovation scholars like myself. If you say, what type of economist are you, Professor Teece? Well, I'm not a neoclassical economist. I'm basically an Austrian economist. If there's a school out there, and it's a very small school, Joseph Schumpeter and Frederick Hayek were members of it, that saw the economic system as being in disequilibrium. 99% of my profession in economics and also the profession of finance sees the world as being in equilibrium and uses equilibrium models. They're all dead wrong. If the world is VUCA, then these equilibrium models are not applicable. That 99% of analysis in theoretical finance and analysis in theoretical and economics assume something which is not true. So, you've got to be a little bit skeptical of some of the things that some of our economists and finance folks say. So Einstein here reminds us that it's not about intellect. There's something about being creative and about intuition that helps you on the way to discovery. But discovery is what it's all about. And sensing is about discovering and pattern reading and sense making, not just sensing what's going on, but making sense of it. A lot of people can see the same data, the same world unraveling, but only a few people make sense of it. I mean, they sense it, but make sense of it. So sense making, being able to articulate what's going on, is a very rare skill. A lot of people can tell you what's going on. That's good sensing. But so what? What does it mean? And what's the course of action? And go read about inflation right now. Everybody, the Financial Times says inflation is there and the money supply is up. And lots of people will tell you that money supply is up. The sense there's something going on. But what does it mean in terms of the way the global economy is going to change? Does it really mean high inflation or not? Figuring these things out is, how you get to be George Soros on the one hand, or Steve Jobs on the other hand. There's a lot in common between great investors and great managers and great executives and the founders of startups, is they're able to make sense of the future. Also, being lucky helps, but it's not going to be enough. Next, please, Ian. So here are our good friends at Siemens. This is the CEO, Joe Kaeser, quoted in Strategy Plus Business saying, "How do we recognize early indicators of a changing world? What's your competitive environment? How do the customers of your customers change?" That's the type of stuff you need to understand, because by the time you see by the numbers, it's too late. Well, so much for all the quantitative stuff we teach you in business school. By the time it gets quantified, it's too late, if you believe the CEO of Siemens, and I do. If you're in this VUCA world, once again, if you're off in some isolated corner of the economy that's shielded from innovation and deep uncertainty in the global economy, yes, what you learn in the textbooks is exactly the right stuff. But if you're in the rest of the economy, and I suspect all of you are, then it's the wrong stuff. And you've got to learn something new. That's why we've got dynamic capabilities before you. Next, please, Ian. So sensing, some little examples from history. Lee Iacocca at Chrysler turned Chrysler around with the minivan. Of course, minivans everywhere, but there was no minivan concept before the Chrysler minivan. Was not only a great concept, but it was also an elegant car and quite a reliable car. And Iacocca, who was, I think, formerly at Ford, figured that out, and that saved Chrysler. And that was, it's a 30-year run. When you get these things right, you often get a run for a generation. Starbucks. I mean, who would have guessed a coffee house on every corner? Right here in Berkeley, we have Pete's Coffee. Pete's Coffee was the quintessential company that could have become Starbucks. They figured out the concept of the European coffee house. So they got the sensing part. Old Mr. Pete, the Dutchman, who lived right here in Berkeley. He was fastidious about the quality of coffee. He wouldn't sell you coffee without coming into your home to check your coffee maker. If it wasn't clean and properly scrubbed, he wouldn't sell you coffee because he wanted you to have a great coffee experience. But he did not make sense of the opportunity, and he really wasn't thinking about a scalable business. And it took Starbucks to come along and do it for him. And then, Pete did a Johnny Come Lately franchising arrangement that's a pale shadow of Starbucks, still not bad, but 20 years late. And Discount Airways. None of you have heard of Laker Airways or Freddie Laker, but Discount Airlines or Discount Air Travel was not invented in the United States. It was invented in the UK. It was invented in the transatlantic. Old Freddie Laker bought some old 707s, I think, or maybe it was 747s. I forget what it was. The big airlines, finally met him on price and drove him out of business, but he still pioneered with a happy face and a good chuckle. He pioneered low cost, no frills air travel. And then Southwest comes along 25 years later with a very smart model to do that on a regional basis. So, Laker didn't have enough cash. He went in too thinly capitalized to stand competition from the big boys. So he got the sensing right and just fell a bit short on the seizing. So he still goes down in history as a pioneer. And Southwest got the sensing right too, and the seizing through a very distinct business model and focus on the 737 and a very orthogonal strategy and business model from everywhere else. The rest of the story. And Uber and Lyft, both pioneers in ride sharing, created a whole new concept. Of course, they were enabled by 4G. If it wasn't for mobile telephony, there would be no Uber, there'd be no Lyft. They should be sending checks to Qualcomm, who invented the technology that made this kind of service ubiquitous and possible. But anyway, my point is they figured out that the networks were changing, that mobile phones would have the capability to run an app that would now enable this service. And yes, kudos to them. They got this whole model pioneered, and they yet to make money from it, but I think eventually they will. At least the market thinks they will. They're certainly providing a great service to society and bringing competition to a moribund industry. So this is discovering the latent stuff. Market analysis isn't going to give you these answers. The story about the Xerox machine. I forget the forerunner of Xerox. I'll think of the name in a minute. But they went to Arthur D. Little for a market study, and Arthur D. Little told them, this is in the 1950s, that the total market for Xerox for copy machines in the United States was somewhere between 50 and 100. It's not about, Steve Jobs didn't go hire a marketing company. He didn't do a market survey to figure out what the opportunity was for the iPhone. He just could make sense of what he could see in Silicon Valley. And Nokia was in Silicon Valley too. In fact, Nokia had an R&D laboratory right in Berkeley on Shattuck Avenue. They were looking at, they knew that 4G was coming. They knew the internet was potentially accessible. They knew they could see all the same bits and pieces that Steve Jobs could see, but Steve Jobs was able to put it together and Nokia wasn't. That's not sensing, that's seizing, which I'll come to in a moment. But anyway, here we go, the ability to see an opportunity, something latent in the market. I mean, the opportunity for Starbucks was probably sitting there 20 years before it was addressed by Starbucks. The opportunity for the minivan was probably there 10 years before. The opportunity for Uber and Lyft was, probably wasn't there more than 1 month before, because that relied on sufficient speed and bandwidth with 4G before that could work. The opportunity for Discount Airways probably wasn't there until Southwest really grabbed it in a big way. Next, please, Ian. So you've asked for rules. You know, everyone wants give me the playbook. Give me the list of things I need to do to be good at this. And so here, at least with respect to sensing, I'm giving you a routine, I suppose. You can call it that if you wish. Sensing incorporates 4 main steps: sensing, sense-making, scenario narratives, and a hypothesis development. So it's about collecting information, what's going on here, trying to make sense of it, then creating a story. People don't really get to understand things until you can put it into a coherent narrative, which is really another form of the scientific method. You're actually building a hypothesis. This is what great entrepreneurs do. They build a hypothesis about what's going on, and they're testing it. They're testing it not in the way you taught to test it in the research lab. They're testing it by trying it on their friends. They're testing it by trying it on customers. They're testing it by giving talks about it and seeing what kind of reaction they get. In the meantime, they're constantly revising their hypothesis about what's really going on. And then, you know, they move and they act. So there are loose steps. There's no cookbook here, but there are some steps you can go through of sensing and making sense. I mean, sensing, you collect all the information from the market, not just from your own customers, but from other people's customers, from the customers that you wish you had, that you don't have, from other people's customers, from people that could be customers but are not customers of anybody. And then you try and make sense of that, and you look at technologies that could maybe enable a new service or a new product, and then you wind that up into a story that's a sort of a loose version of a business model about how you're going to do that, and then you sort of test it. You may actually experiment in the market. You know, I built several professional services firms. The first attempt doesn't always work. But, you know, you pull up stakes and you try again, or you modify. You know, that's the whole lean startup thing. Well, it is about, you know, sensing, sense-making, acting, changing, pivot, learning, you know, and then iterating until you get it right, because you can't predict. You've got to explore, experiment, learn, and then figure out, you know, something that's going to work. And then you put your money down big time, or other people's money, if you've got access to venture capital. Next, please, Ian. Well, let me just stop there, because this is on to the decision-making section, or seizing. But let me stop to see if there's any questions about sensing and sense-making, because this is very much an entrepreneurial function that you've got to keep alive in big companies as well as small companies. And this is the clairvoyant people in Silicon Valley are quite amazing in this regard. And before we go on, let's just stop and pause to see if we have any questions.
If anyone would like to go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Professor. This is Regina. When I saw these 3 points, sensing, seizing, transforming, it really made me think as a manager about like an additional team I'm thinking about creating. And so I feel like I might be in the sensing phase right now, where I'm identifying a need and I'm kind of testing it out, having some conversations with different stakeholders to see if the idea resonates. Is that basically what sensing is? And then I don't know, you're probably not going to give an exact rule about the timing of seizing, but is there like a moment where you're like, I have enough data, I need to like make a move?
Yes. I mean, it's not about having enough data alone. It's about making sense of that data. And that, if you make sense of it, it'll tell you the following. A, is there an opportunity? B, how big is it? And C, who is the best? Who's likely to move on it first? And D, you know, when do I need to move? So I would say it breaks down to those 4 tests, but it's really just think about the scientific method. You're doing a loose form of hypothesis development first, and then hypothesis testing. And have you tried the idea? It's not just about trying the idea on your boss. It's try the idea on customers, try the idea on suppliers, or try the idea on people that are not necessarily got the same frame of mind that you do, and get their reactions. And sometimes they shrug their shoulders, but maybe it's because they don't understand it. So you've got to do that to your own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of whoever else is going to be with you in making the decision. No crisp endpoints. There's certainly beginning points, but there's no crisp endpoints. But the point is, yes, eventually, if you don't turn it into a decision of some kind, and that decision may be to do nothing, but if it is to go, then you also have to know, how do you see? Maybe until you get sufficient resources, it's not worth starting. You can start too soon. Maybe you need a partner to do it with. I mean, all of those things come into play.
Cool. Yes, I will keep you guys posted on how it goes throughout the semester.
Well, there's a paper I've written with Sophie Lee in the California Management Review. It's actually on the reading list, which talks about abductive reasoning. There is deductive reasoning, there's inductive reasoning, and there's this sort of orphan category out there called abductive. And what I'm talking about here sort of fits into this orphan category of abductive. And so if you chase down abductive thinking and abductive reasoning, and that, we'll take a look at that paper by Teece, Pederoff, and Lee, L-E-I-H, and the California Management Review. There's a little bit more development of this, and we'll eventually get to it in the class.
Okay, thank you.
Professor Teece, it's Chris here. I'm trying to look for an example on your website and other locations about sensing. I love the framework, and I'm working on a presentation right now. And is there an example floating around on your website or else that shows how sensing is used as a presentation, as an example?
No, there's some of it's scattered through the class materials. There's just anecdotes. No, there's nothing on my website. But Ian, why don't we take this under advisement, and we'll get back to you. Just drop me an email, and we'll find something for you. We should have something somewhere on a website to help you. So good question, and we'll do a little research, and we'll give you some things that hopefully will be helpful.
Thanks so much.
Anybody else? All right, so the last, is there somebody else in?
There is not, no. So yeah, we've got about 15 minutes, and we should at some point talk about the readings for next week as well.
All right, so I'm going to cover off some part of this second bullet, which is about seizing or decision making. There's some many things I could have called this category, but seizing, you can call it execution, if you will. The classic case is Xerox PARC. Look at poor Xerox. What did they invent at Xerox PARC? They invented, the GUI interface. They invented the mouse. They invented the Ethernet. They invented the laser printer. They had all the elements of the personal computer there. And they had the good sense that Xerox, 5 years earlier, Xerox saw that computing was going to be important in the future. And they set up this research lab out here on the West Coast. Remember, Xerox was headquartered in Stamford, Connecticut. They're a copier company at the time, still substantially today. But the CEO had the brilliance to see the future was computing. So they took the best people from Carnegie Mellon. Even back then, Carnegie Mellon was great at computer science. And it keeps getting rated, and most recently by Google, that Carnegie Mellon is still great at computer science and has a wonderful history going back to the 50s and 60s. But Xerox raided Carnegie Mellon, set up this lab, funded it generously. The guys went out and invented the future. And then the idiots back in Connecticut, when it came to doubling down, or tripling down, or quadrupling down, and making a PC, they just sat on their hands. They got distracted by financial shenanigans and acquisitions and M&A, which is always more sexy to the CFO. And they let, the Xerox park sit there. Eventually, of course, the story. Steve Jobs comes along, and they didn't take very good care of their trade secrets either. In fact, I'm not smart enough to know what it was, but I was given a tour of Xerox Park. I saw the first laser printers. I saw the mouse. I saw the GUI interface. But it's a classic case. I could sense there was something there. I couldn't make sense of it. Steve Jobs saw it, made sense of it, and then that became the Mac. The Mac is really what Xerox was developing. So seizing is about eventually somebody is saying, okay, we're going to go build this stuff, or maybe have somebody else build it, but we're going to go do it. And there's no point in getting the sensing part right if you don't get the second part right. And that was the story. Boeing with a 747, first jumbo jet, because they're willing to invest big. And I mentioned IBM with the 360 system. But there are many cases of companies that invented things early on that just then didn't put the money behind it, or in some cases they did, but it was too late. Another classic case is the British company that invented the CAT scanner. Sorry, what's his name again? The recording company. Sir Godfrey Hounsfield was there. I'm just drawing a blank on it right now. But anyway, what is it that causes companies not to fail at this seizing bit? Part of it is what we talked about before, which is the NPV isn't clear. With hindsight, you can see that these look like easy decisions. And in fact, I do believe if Xerox had focused on it, it was an easy decision, but they were literally distracted. So what is it that prevents companies from doing this? And often the answer is that they're too distracted by their current business. And this could end up cannibalizing the existing business. Now, that wasn't the case for Xerox. They didn't, they weren't going to sell less copy machines if they started selling PCs. So they don't have that excuse. Nobody had a cannibalization problem to worry about. So next slide, please, Ian. Yeah, well, I kind of covered this. IBM, Boeing, Boeing here with the 707, but also the 747. This one, the 707, was an easier bet for Boeing because it had already developed the KC-10 or whatever it was, tanker for the U.S. Air Force. So they got to essentially do most of the development costs of the 707 by doing a tanker for the Air Force, and then they just took the tank out and punched the holes in for windows. But importantly, they used small windows. Remember, the de Havilland, the British company de Havilland, had done the Comet. It was the first civilian jet airliner, was the de Havilland Comet. But that was in the 60s. But sadly, a number of them crashed because back in those days, they didn't realize that flying at high altitude would cause metal fatigue. And the fuselage was stressed by compression and decompression. And small cracks began opening up around the windows because the windows were too big. And the hatch on the top, and it blew, and these things depressurized at high altitude, and 2 or 3 of them crashed. And that was the end of de Havilland in the jet business. But Boeing came along behind, had the benefit of the learning from de Havilland, and the rest is history until Airbus come along, of course. Next, please, Ian.
And EMI, the Beatles record label, was the
yes.
involved with the CAT scan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CAT scanner, all of you have had a scan of one kind or another. So the greatest invention since X-rays was the body scanner, the CAT scanner, which came out of a little British company called EMI. We know of EMI today as a recording company because of the Beatles. They were under the EMI label. But during the Second World War, EMI was a highly creative company, and it created the first airborne radar for the Bristol Beaufighter. And it was a very, very creative company, and it had this brilliant scientist, Godfrey Hounsfield, who figured out how to take an image of a pig's brain and use a computer to assemble it, and created the first scanner, CAT scanner. They invented it, they designed it, but they didn't have the cash to commercialize it, and nor did they know anything about the market. The market in the UK was about 3. That's all the British health system could afford. But El Camino Hospital in Los Altos bought 6. They were their first customers, and then I think 2 of those 6, one went out to GE and one went out to Siemens, who reverse engineered it, and they were already in the X-ray business, and the rest is history. Poor little EMI went out of business. Sir Godfrey Hounsfield got the Nobel Prize. It was the greatest contribution to radiology for the last 100 years. But they didn't make a dime off of it because they didn't have the capability to see. They should have, with hindsight, gone out and raised a bunch of money and built the factories, or they should have joint ventured. And they tried too little too late, and they got walked over by the competition. So very sad story. That really is a failure in commercialization. The question was asked before, some of you are aware I have a paper called Profiting from Innovation, where I developed this story at great length, at least at some length. And this is where, seizing is in part not only making an investment decision, but coming up with the right business model and the right commercialization strategy. So there's all kinds of opportunities for mistakes. There's opportunity for mistake in commercialization strategy, choice of a partner, for how much capital you raise, for all of these things. So there's opportunities for failure here. But as Wayne Peacock says, you don't need to know everything to make good decisions. Think like a startup, decide and get on with it. So if you sit and wait for 100% certainty about everything until you get the financial plan just right, you're too late. So you can get there with 70% of the information, says Wayne Peacock. Then make the decision and get on with it. And if you didn't get it exactly right, you can adapt and change tomorrow or the next day. Very good advice. And that's part of the dynamic capabilities creed. Precision is your enemy. I've added one more thing to my enemy list. Efficiency is the enemy. Precision is the enemy. Accept uncertainty and imperfection. Imperfection is your friend. Uncertainty is not your friend. Although it could be if you're good at managing in the world of uncertainty. And Wayne goes on to say, no matter how well you forecast what might happen, there's still a lot of variability in the environment. At the end of the day, it's the ability to adapt quickly that will define the separation of the winners and the losers. So it's about getting it more or less right and then adapting. It's not just about adaptation. It's about getting out in front and then adjusting, which, a lot of this, it's about learning. Think of this in terms of learning writ large. And that's sort of what the lean startup model is also about. Much harder to do lean startup in a big company like Boeing or IBM or General Motors. But you've got to accept many elements of that framework because it's all drawing from the same, fountainhead of how do you manage under uncertainty. Next, please, Ian.
Right.
Now, I'm an economist, and as every economist reads, Lord Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, one of the world's greatest economists of all times. He's the guy that helped the world get out of the Great Depression. The time of the Great Depression, it was thought that the right strategy for government is to reduce the money supply and reduce government spending, and Keynes said, no, you got to do exactly the opposite. This is when the government has to expand. This is when you got to expand the money supply. But that's not what we're talking about here. Keynes is known for this famous statement he made about he couldn't understand, and all economists have this trouble, couldn't understand why business people and investors, he was actually looking at investors, would still buy securities when there's deep uncertainty. He didn't have an explanation for it, so he called it animal spirits. And so I've latched onto it here and said that really Keynes didn't have the word dynamic capabilities to search, or the term dynamic capabilities wasn't in the vocabulary. But what he could have said is that in deep uncertainty, some are able to make decisions, and good managers can make decisions because not of their animal spirits, but because of their dynamic capabilities. So here's Keynes. He stressed that if human nature felt no temptation to take a chance and investment had to rely on cold calculation, then there might not be much investment. Look at that. That's exactly what we were hearing before from none other than the world's wealthiest guy, Jeff Bezos. There's this whole set of decisions that you can't ultimately boil down to a math problem. In other words, you can't make these decisions based on cold calculation, despite the fact that we drum just the opposite into you in business school. Not all of us do, but many of us tend to drum into you that you got to do the numbers. But if you look at most great companies, they're not done by somebody with a computer model. It's usually done by somebody with the back of the envelope calculation and the courage and conviction to invest. And the back of the envelope calculation is often good enough, usually good enough when you're looking at deep uncertainty. And in fact, if you go down to 3 decimal places, you've got false precision. You can't get it right, and you're fooling yourself if you think you are. So another part of decision making is be willing to decide without full information. Have animal spirits, if you will. Next slide, please, Ian.
Well, actually, so we're just 1 minute shy of 9 o'clock. So
is that the last season slide?
Let's see.
We've got finish the season,
more on season.
How many more?
We've got several more. Actually,
okay.
Yeah, about 7 more or so.
All right. Well, we'll do this one and call it an evening. I'm beating on the same drum here, but I got to beat this drum because most of your time in the MBA program, people are beating on a different drum. Here's another thing you need for dynamic capabilities, and that's a sense of urgency to make that decision. So coming back to the question from the class before, when do you act? Well, you got to make a decision. The decision could be, well, I'm not going to invest right now. So the decision isn't always do now, but my mantra is, if in doubt, do. Why do I say that? Well, because if you wait until doubt disappears, it's too late. Whereas if you do, or you do in a small way, you'll learn, and then you can make a better decision. So Ajay Banga says, having a sense of urgency to make that decision, take that risk without knowing everything, but having had the patience at the same time to listen to people who know more than you. That's an interesting balance. So all of these great executives here are telling the same story, which is, yes, you listen to all sources of information. Yes, if there are numbers, you look at the numbers, but don't wait for the numbers to be precisely correct, because if they are, it's too late. So I'll just leave it there. We're midstream, but hopefully I wet your whistle enough that you'll come back eagerly for the next class, and that you will start to do a bit of reading. But let me just say again, I'm throwing you in the deep end of the swimming pool. So what we're going to be doing next class is finishing this presentation, which will actually probably take us at least half of the class. And then we're going to go back to building some of the elements. And what I've got for you there is to start off with this paper on next generation competition, which is going to reinforce the fact that the world is different. The knowledge economy world is different from the industrial economy. Then over onto page 5 of the reading list, there's an article on business ecosystems and on intangible assets. So what you're going to hear from me is forget about industries. We need to be thinking about business ecosystems. If you want to learn about industries, take Michael Porter's class on industry analysis at Harvard. It was really the right class to take in the 1930s, but they're still offering it. So it's there if you want it. But any course that's labeled industry analysis, I would shy away from myself. But any course that's got something about platforms and ecosystems in it, maybe that's something you should look at. Or any course on intangible assets, that's something you should look at as well. And then we'll go into, I suspect that'll probably do for next class. If we're lucky, we may get into a little bit about looking at the global system for research and development to understand innovation management, because behind dynamic capabilities, there's also elements of innovation management. So what I want to finish here by saying is that dynamic capabilities is just an organizing framework. It's a way for you to make sense of. Remember, we talked about sensing and sense making. We also need to do this in the world of ideas. It's a framework to help you weed out what's unimportant and focus on what's important, on all the things that matter in today's complex business world if you're trying to build long-term competitive advantage. If you've got a different goal, if you just want to get rich on Wall Street, well, actually, it's still useful there too. But if you really want to understand how to build great organizations and keep them great long-term, if you want to understand how it's done and how it's not done, that's what this course is about. There's quite a bit of reading. As you'll see, it's a pretty lengthy reading list. I know you're not going to read everything, and some of these things, there's multiple ways of saying the same thing, and you'll find one article more interesting than another. That's okay. I want you to do as much as you can. If you don't read a lot, you won't get the richness. There's no shortcut to a deep understanding of dynamic capabilities. But if you invest in a deep understanding of dynamic capabilities, I guarantee you, you'll be a leader. You'll be a leader, at least, in figuring out the future and knowing what's important for the elite in organization. That also takes some personal skills on top. But if you have this intellectual framework and the right set of personal skills, then you can be a great entrepreneur and a great leader of a business. So that's what I'm trying to convey here. All I'm doing is distilling what I've learned from the social sciences and from observing Silicon Valley and great leaders around the world for the last 30 years. So, well, not only from observing others, but from doing it myself. I'm a small-time entrepreneur. I built a couple of companies, taken 2 of them public. I built 3 companies, actually, taken 2 public. And I'm one of the few people, in fact, I may be the only one, that's both building companies, taking them public, and writing about them in an academically credible way. If you find another one, let me know who it is. So in that sense, I have uniqueness. Whether it's good uniqueness or not, I'll let you folks judge. But I'm delivering these classes from the Berkeley Research Group here in Emeryville because the facilities are more convenient for me. And Ian Lees works for the Berkeley Research Group Institute. We're helping out the Haas School here. We love the Haas School. We think it's a fantastic school. We're glad that you're alumni of the Haas School or that you're students in our MBA program. But, you know, part of the Haas motto is to think differently and to think outside the box. And here with this class, I'm doing my best to help you think differently and to think outside the box and to be creative about doing it and smart and polite about doing it. So let me just leave it there. Ian Lees will channel any questions you might have to me. We're more than happy to run after issues that you think are important. Give me a sense, if you will, by email or by voice, as to things you really want to hear more on. This is not a wooden course outline, and there's ways to shape it according to your interests and passions. So don't hesitate to get what the burning issues are before us, and we'll try to deal with them along the way in the class. Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the 10-minute hiatus up front, but I think we hit a good clip and we got a fair amount done, and we'll keep going at this pace until we no longer can. Good evening.
Great. Thank you, Professor Teece. So have a look on the announcements section of B Courses, where we'll post the key readings for next week and any other announcements. Everyone should have access to that, and we'll make sure that both auditors and students will be able to link to the appropriate readings and content for next week. With that, good night or good morning if you're in another time zone. All right, take care.